Hello everyone, welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Yissilmissil, and today we are doing part 13 of the Chicago film industry deep dive. And today is the last chapter of the book before entering the epilogue and a little bit of notes on Orson Welles. So, hope you're all doing well today. And we will get going shortly here. So I thank you again for all being here. This series will be wrapping up within the next 2 weeks. And it is how it is. That's everything that has a beginning has an end. So, without further ado, we shall get started. Again, we are reading from Flickering Empire by Michael Glover Smith and Adam Selzer. Also, don't forget to like this video, comment in the live, comment after the video is done, and if you're not subscribed yet, please do if you enjoy this type of stuff. So we are starting chapter 13, Major M.L.C. Funkhouser and the Chicago Censorship Code. And we'll be finishing this chapter as well today. And it's not too long. It's about 7 pages. So, let's begin. Besides its pioneering roles in the production, distribution, and exhibition of motion pictures in America, Chicago has the dubious distinction of pioneering movie censorship laws and ratings boards as well. Chicago's stringent early censorship code almost certainly hurt the local filmmaking industry and probably contributed, at least in small part, to its decline. Ironically, the censorship laws seemed to hurt local filmmakers the most between 1908 and 1912, when the Chicago studios were at their strongest. After that, the censors laid off the local industry just as it began to decline, and became more vigilant about going after the MPPC's independent rivals, as they were growing increasingly powerful. Indeed, the story of the birth and evolution of film censorship laws in Chicago has curious parallels to the rise and fall of the major Chicago studios in general. Beginning in 1907, the second city became one of the first cities in the United States to censor movies at the time, when George Spohr and Gilbert Anderson were in the process of founding the Peerless Manufacturing Company, and when Colonel Selig's production fortunes were taking a drastic turn for the better. This is also the year in which Chicago's City Hall first gave George Shippey, the chief of police, the authority to grant exhibition permits to theater owners on a film-by-film basis. A movie without the proper permit could face being recut to meet the local censorship code, or else risk being banned outright. Because of the sheer volume of new films that were being exhibited in Chicago's hundreds of theaters every week, it was impossible for each one to be screened in advance at police headquarters. Chief Shippey therefore assigned 10 police officers to the task of patrolling Nickelodeons to watch out for pictures depicting, quote, blood and thunder, end quote, violence, or behavior that might be deemed salacious. Hey Jason, good to see you in the chat. Theater owners who allegedly violated this code were subject to having their licenses revoked. SNA's The James Boys in Missouri from 1908, in spite of being a local production that had proven popular elsewhere across the country, was deemed so immoral in its overall tone that no amount of editing could have resulted in it being granted a permit to play in Chicago. Recognizing that the local censorship laws were bad for business, the Motion Picture Patents Company challenged them on legal grounds in 1909, but both the Illinois Supreme Court and the United States Supreme Court upheld the censorship code. Shortly afterwards, Chicago municipal law also decreed that a separate permit, pink in color, be issued for movies that were deemed fit for only, quote, adult, end quote, audiences. The plan was to divide Chicago theaters into two categories, those for general audiences and those for adults only. Humorously, but perhaps unsurprisingly, this phenomenon was short-lived. It was quickly discovered that the, quote, pink permit, end quote, actually functioned as the best possible form of advertising for films to which it had been affixed. As the film industry became regulated and stabilized by the policies implemented by the Edison Trust, Chicago put in place in 1912 an official censorship board. The chief censor was incredibly named Metellus Lucullus Cicero Funkhouser, a career military man and veteran of the Spanish-American War, who had joined the Chicago police force and gradually risen to the rank of second deputy superintendent. He was, in the Grand Chicago fashion, fabulously corrupt, not only for allegedly taking bribes from motion picture studios, but also for reportedly breaking his own laws by holding private exhibitions of the naughty bits that he had ordered cut from the movies he had censored. Descriptions of censorship activity were also published in local newspapers every week. Kitty Kelly's, quote, Flickerings from Filmland, end quote, column in the Daily Tribune, for instance, contained a popular sub-feature that provided curt descriptions of banned films and excised scenes that had been provided to her by Funkhouser's board. This arrangement meant that Funkhouser's censorship work received favorable publicity in the Daily Tribune, while somewhat hypocritically, the paper simultaneously allowed its readers the thrill of experiencing banned movies or controversial movie scenes by at least being able to read about them. A typical banned picture was an independently produced instructional film from 1913 on how to dance. Quote, the hesitation waltz, the turkey trot, and the tango, end quote, which the Daily Tribune colorfully described as, quote, freak dances, end quote. Presumably these dances were more risque than the waltz that was soon to be named for Kathleen Williams. In a Daily Tribune article, Major Funkhouser warned against the dangerous influence that such a movie would allegedly have on the youth of the day. Quote, the objection is not based so much on those pictures in themselves, but upon the effect that they would have on young people. After witnessing these professional performers go through these dances in a carefully regulated way, they will go to the public dance halls and try them. That is where the danger is. Most of these halls either sell liquor or are close to the places where it is cold. Think of a young girl or a young man with 2 or 3 drinks down trying those dances, end quote. We also have a photograph here in the book, and the subheading here is Major M.L.C. Funkhouser, far right, examines a couple standing in a dance pose. And this is from the Chicago Daily News, courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. So Funkhouser's right there. But you got all these people in this image here. And again, we're starting to see what really happened here in Chicago. The Edison Trust put together a censorship board and also got Chicago and Illinois state legislation to get on board with censoring movies. And though his intentions were probably good, it backfired on him because this opened up the market to pornography. Hey, Texas Learny. Good to see you. Texas says, love the old school vibe, Yissil. Yep. Yeah, that's what this Saturday show is all about. 1900s Chicago film industry. So I figure this is rather fitting. But we're learning today how all of the film studios in Chicago eventually moved to the West Coast. And why. They had more freedom out there, but they were also making films that were potentially corrupting the youth of the day. And while I see that as a valid point, with Edison already having a stranglehold over the films being distributed, the projectors that they can be played on, then he introduced the censorship code, which we're talking about today. All of that eventually backfired on him. So it's like he did too much too fast. And that essentially created a void in the city of Chicago, and everybody fled for California. Just the unfortunate reality of it all. Well, let's continue here. In a speech given not long afterwards to the Evanston Women's Club, Funkhouser elaborated on what his standards were for what he considered to be moral pictures. In addition to showing zero tolerance for, quote, scenes showing the degradation of women, the hero worship of criminals, the portrayal of crime, or the ridiculing of those in authority, end quote, Funkhouser made it clear that all films exhibited in Chicago should be fit to play for audiences of all ages. Quote, 85% of those who attend moving picture shows were women and children. Many of the latter are under 15 years of age, and nothing harmful to them should be shown. End quote. And that's a quote from Funkhouser. Funkhouser then revisited the dance theme by declaring not only what he considered permissible in a dancing scene within a movie, but also how Chicagoans should behave when dancing in public themselves. Quote, tango dancers must keep a 6-inch space between them. They may touch hands, and a man's arm may encircle a fair dancer's waist, but if a couple fails to observe the rule as to space, it will mean a ride in a patrol wagon. End quote. At the same meeting, Harriet Vittium, the quote, superintendent of the Northwestern University settlement, stated that movie theaters would ideally provide, quote, fairy stories, end quote, for children, before also complaining that the congested Nickelodeons forced children to, quote, breathe air laden with germs, end quote. This lady's name, again, is Harriet Vittum. I just misread that. It's spelled Vittum. Covering the meeting for Moving Picture World, James McQuaid wrote with indignation, quote, Miss Vittum evidently would like to see theaters turned into nurseries, and Major Funkhouser, in his zeal, would assume divine rights to prescribe a code of morals, end quote. You see where this is heading? This got political really fast. McQuaid ended his notice with a sentence that would prove to be prophetic. Quote, the moving picture will outlive all such narrow-minded restrictions, and in a few years one will look back in amazement at these puritanical outbursts, end quote. Man, now we're in 2025, and look at the slop that we have on Netflix, for example. All of these slasher films, all this sexual promiscuity, beyond anything that could have even been imagined even 10 years ago. In a 1915 column titled, quote, Among the Missing, end quote, Kitty Kelly noted that the two, quote, rejections, end quote, i.e. banned films, for that week were Pathé's It's a Long, Long Way to Tipperary and the independently produced The Great Mysteries of New York. The former was rejected on grounds that it depicted, quote, national factionalism, bellicose activities between nations engaged in the present European conflict, and has a tendency to violate the laws of neutrality and to disturb the public peace, end quote. The latter was refused a permit because it, quote, shows operative methods of criminals, morbid scenes of violence, the bringing of a woman into a life of crime by drugged wine, and is not relieved by any adequate moral lesson, end quote. Significantly, neither film was produced by an MPPC-affiliated studio. See, there's another thing. We're getting into favoritism among the studios here. And so if you were outside of that, then you would be censored, essentially. It's another way to control the market. That's why I said Edison went too strong, too fast, and now we are in this situation at this point in time in this book. Among the descriptions of scenes that had been censored for that week were, quote, cutouts, end quote, from films produced by a host of independents, as well as a few by Edison Manufacturing and Vitagraph. These offending scenes ranged from a, quote, defaulter making false entry in bank ledger, end quote, to that of someone, quote, handing police officer tip, end quote. But no locally produced movies were censored that week. The board seems to have been willingly inconsistent. No cuts to the leopard's foundling were noted, and that film contained scenes of Kathleen Williams scantily clad in jungle rags as well as in a corset, not to mention various scenes of her and her love interest in bondage. Similar kinds of scenes, meanwhile, were cut from many other non-trust movies. Chicago authorities did, however, censor at least one notable locally produced film around this time. On July 24th, 1915, the SS Eastland capsized in the Chicago River. And I actually have a book about that ship sinking in the Chicago River. I might end up reading that on this channel here at some point. It had been loaded to its new capacity, 2,500, for the first time, and suffered from both mechanical failures and a few design flaws. The exact nature of what caused it to capsize is still in dispute, but the body count is generally agreed to be 844. While the disaster was still underway, cameramen from the Chicago Daily Tribune set up camp on the fire escape of the Reed Murdoch building, a grocery warehouse on the other side of the river from the disaster, and shot about 1,000 feet of film. Other scenes consisted of footage shot at the two main buildings that functioned as morgues, the Reed Murdoch and the 2nd Regiment Armory on Washington Boulevard, as well as a few shots of survivors. By all accounts, the film, simply titled The Eastland Disaster, was, quote, tasteful, end quote. Stretchers could be seen being carried out of the hull of the ship, but they were all covered. No actual corpses were seen. The Daily Tribune promptly offered all profits from exhibitions to the funds that were established to provide for the families of the victims, and the footage was being shown in several regional theaters within 3 days of the disaster. A Flint, Michigan theater advertised that viewers could thrill to, quote, the struggle for life in a river teeming with death, end quote, on a double bill with The Knockout from 1914, a Chaplin two-reeler from his Keystone days. Man, that's real grim. And you know, these paying audiences probably didn't even realize, most of them anyway, didn't realize that this was authentic footage. They could have thought, oh, it's just a movie. And then they laugh it up with Chaplin after the fact. That's kind of, I don't know, what would you call that? Sadistic in a way. The Eastland disaster was also on exhibit in suburban Forest Park, but Chicago proper would not see it. On July 28th, a screening was held in City Hall for a few local dignitaries. A spokesman for the Daily Tribune said that 40 prints, that's 40 prints had been struck, and all of them were being used strictly to raise funds for the survivors, not to commercialize the disaster. So they created 40 reels, 40 different copies to be distributed. And that's good that it wasn't used commercially, that the funds went to the survivors' families. Quote, we feel there is nothing morbid in it. The spokesman said, quote, we feel that it properly may be shown as a graphic illustration of the disaster, carrying its clear lesson." End quote. He made an interesting case. The dead were dead, and their survivors were in difficult financial straits. Still, charging admission to see a film of the disaster arguably skirted the bounds of good taste. And I'd agree with that. I think they were more fascinated with how quickly that they were able to release the footage. And this would be, I guess, the early echoes of live news broadcasting. As close to live as you possibly can be. The Daily Tribune's own description read, quote, "There are no horrors of a repulsive nature. All figures on the stretchers are covered, so there is no possibility of recognition of the dead. The distance of the camera prevented any close-up effects at all, except 2 girl survivors, safe and dry, who posed for the film." End quote. In the end, it was banned in Chicago, along with all other Eastland-related films. The one made by the Daily Tribune was not the only such film put before the Municipal Censor Board. A series of slides made by one Harry Cohan, that's spelled Cohan, was forbidden to be exhibited, as was the Eastland disaster. A quote, Hearst Selig News Pictorial Extra. End quote. The nature of the Selig film of the disaster is wholly unknown. It may simply have been a series of still photos, actual footage of the disaster in morgues, or even a reenactment filmed at Selig's studio. I'd tend to go with the reenactment theory, or speculation, because these guys ended up doing recreations of the Spanish-American War just a couple decades earlier. They put boats in a bathtub and passed it off as authentic war footage, so take that with what you will. The same board meeting, for the record, ordered a subtitle removed from Selig's Isle of Content. And the subtitle was, quote, "Go with your paramour, but I will take the child." End quote. And ordered SNA to cut a scene showing a woman kicking a man from Street Fakers, that's the name of the film, and a scene showing a woman's leg above the knee in the film A Bunch of Keys. These cuts give an interesting view of the kind of scenes to which the board objected. And this also says see Appendix C for a longer selection of censored scenes. And we might look at that at part 15, the last in the series here. The Eastland disaster film by the Daily Tribune is now thought to be lost, along with any other film versions, of which there seem to have been several. The owner of a Toledo theater bought the rights in September, and it was said that the Daily Tribune destroyed its footage in 1926. Since the disaster led to numerous legal proceedings and hearings, it was likely that a print must have been kept for evidence. With so many prints having been struck, it is far from impossible that one survives elsewhere. And I agree with that. I think we still have yet to rediscover this film. I think it's out there somewhere. I wouldn't be surprised if it's in somebody's basement or attic in Evanston or something. That the important Eastland footage was unavailable in Chicago, but easy to see elsewhere, was one of the many factors that began to sour people on Funkhouser and the board. Under Funkhouser's reign as censor, it appears that foreign and independent pictures, i.e. non-trust movies, such as the Daily Tribune's Eastland film, were consistently banned more frequently. They came in for far harsher censorship than their MPPC counterparts. And keep in mind, MPPC was founded by Edison. The Chicago Censorship Code was allegedly based on excising material deemed politically inflammatory or too violent or sexually explicit in nature. But it also appears that many films were censored or banned arbitrarily, and that these fates were more likely to befall non-trust pictures. This bias meant that while the local newspapers may have portrayed Major Funkhouser favorably, he was spectacularly unpopular with the nationally distributed trade papers and magazines, especially as the independent studios were growing more powerful. Moving Picture World, for instance, denounced Funkhouser's, quote, extreme and narrow view of film censorship, end quote, and compared his puritanical zeal to that of the persecutors in the Salem witch trials. Hey, wow. Okay. Might be a little too much there. They're comparing things to things, so they're allowed to say whatever, right? Major Funkhouser's overzealous attitude and unfair practices as censor ultimately hurt the local film culture, not only because he denied Chicagoans the right to see important movies, but also because, according to author Richard Kozarski, he, quote, continually suppressed material that had been passed by the National Board in New York, end quote. Because Chicago's standards were stricter than national standards, Funkhouser's continuous meddling repeatedly halted the regular flow of local distribution and exhibition. Inevitably, during his 5-year tenure, Second Deputy Superintendent Funkhouser was himself continually litigated for his controversial practices. Major Funkhouser was finally fired by Chicago Mayor William Hale, quote, Big Bill Thompson, in 1918, just as the major Chicago studios were at the end of their own ropes. The ouster came about as the result of friction between Funkhouser's censorship board and the new chief of police, John Alcock, spelled A-L-C-O-C-K, who claimed that, quote, the division which Funkhouser heads has not been properly cooperating, end quote, with him. The final straw appears to have been the bad publicity generated by Funkhouser's censoring of 2 war films from 1918, Hearts of the World by D.W. Griffith, and My 4 Years in Germany by William Nye, and that's spelled N-I-G-H. These non-trust films were both massive hits across the nation, and Funkhouser's interference came in for severe criticism in the media. Morris Gest, spelled G-E-S-T, a theatrical producer who was responsible for distributing Griffith's film in Chicago, actually accused the censor of, quote, pro-German sympathies, end quote, a serious charge that was widely quoted in the press. Even May Tinee, that's spelled T-I-N-E-E, at the Daily Tribune, accused Funkhouser of going too far and suggested that he should be, quote, soundly spanked, end quote, towards the end of his career as censor. After Funkhouser was fired, it was schadenfreude time for the trade papers, some of which reported the story with barely concealed glee. The Daily Tribune, however, which had been aligned with the Selig Polyscope Company for years, praised Funkhouser for doing his job efficiently and defended him against charges of corruption. A Daily Tribune staffer editorialized, quote, "We believe that Major Funkhouser, an aggravation as a censor of any kind of artistic expression, was doing able and effective work in an endeavor which almost defies anyone to do successful work. The larger idea in the police management that led to the attempt to get rid of him has not been made apparent. A low-minded person might even suspect that the intent was to get rid of the force of an activity useful to the city but embarrassing to the police." End quote. If, as the anecdotal evidence suggests, the Edison Trust had Funkhouser in its pocket, this situation almost certainly played a role in the Chicago censorship chief's downfall. Historian Raymond J. Haberski, spelled Haberski, notes that Funkhouser, quote, failed to play favorites with the right distributors and exhibitors and had alienated not only the moving picture industry but the police who had friends in the business. End quote. If Major Funkhouser had indeed allied himself with the Edison Trust beginning around 1913, it would have seemed to be a wise decision at the time. The Motion Picture Patents Company was, after all, the mainstream center of the nation's film industry. Funkhouser could not have known then that its position would soon be usurped by the new Hollywood-based, quote, independence, end quote, with which he was able to make enemies in a span of just 5 short years. And that is the end of chapter 13. Now, all we have left is the epilogue. And we are going to save that for next week. But it makes you think, doesn't it? Did Edison go too far? I'd say yes. Texas Learny comments here, that guy sounds controlling. Yeah, Funkhouser, I think he was operating in the same vein as Edison was, but who knows if he had a stake in the MPPC. It's just unfortunate, isn't it? So with all of this censorship laws, with all of this taking place, the film industry moved out west. And they continued to push the limits of what was socially acceptable. I do contribute the Hollywood film industry to the degradation of society. And maybe Edison and Funkhouser saw that as a potential future and wanted to do anything possible to preserve the culture. But they went about it too strongly, too quickly, and it moved the talented away from the central hub of Chicago. Now, question here. Would Chicago have hosted the film industry in the same way Hollywood did if all of this didn't occur? This book told us that it was too big of a city where if it were to have built out from here, it would have gotten consumed by other parts of the city. It wouldn't have been able to grow. I kind of see that as a falsity. It's almost a double-edged sword, because you could have expanded here with studios. You could have made an entire district like they did in Hollywood, where you can purchase land and build your studio. I think that could have been a very realistic route and opportunity for filmmakers. Now, a second thing is opportunity itself. I think Edison really, he was so hurt by somebody stealing one of his inventions early on, like in the 1800s and late 1800s, that he turned around and started stealing everybody else's inventions and patenting them before the inventors could. He punished these other people in the same way he got taken advantage of. And you know the old saying, 2 wrongs don't make a right. So in that case, you had Edison trying to stop overseas films coming into America. That included bootleg copies of his own films. And he also wanted total control over the Nickelodeons, or the movie theaters, by only allowing them to project his films through his projectors. And I think he even went as far as like send the police into some of these Nickelodeons if they were using a different projector and sharing his films on them. I mean, these guys went way too far. They overstepped their boundaries. They should have let the industry grow organically instead of being so strong-armed on everything. And I think we would have had a more positive outcome and potentially a much longer-lasting film industry here in Chicago. Now, we also have Hollywood that later came back to Chicago, and there's a lot of Hollywood films that have been made in Chicago. And we'll actually be covering that in a different series on this channel. I have a book called Hollywood on Lake Michigan that I would like to go over here. But that's after this time period that we're covering here for the next 2 weeks. And we've been doing this. This is part 13, and we're going to part 15. We're going to round out the rest of this Flickering Empire book, and we'll also have a little more discussion on all these things that have been going on. By the way, this is Funkhouser here. And then this is Selig Studio. So I've been having, like, all the photos that I had over the entire series, they're all on this slideshow presentation for today. And I think it already circled through everything. Texas Lerney says, I think it's like a pendulum. The more you restrain, the more it goes the other way eventually. Yeah. Yeah, they over-anticipated the problem, and it turned out backfiring against them, and it's unfortunate. Jason H. says, I also think the relative location out west had more variety for filming locations. Yeah, Jason, I mean, even if you consider the types of films that were being made at the time, westerns were much more suitably being made out west. And I know the weather was also a condition here in Chicago, but they had their studios that they were making features that the locations were inside of jungles. So, I mean, like Selig and Essenay, both of them. They were able to create using their imagination with all of these things. So, I mean, they had the elements there to be successful. They got too greedy. And what can we learn from this too? Like, what can us as an audience of films, and then also us that are filmmakers themselves, what can we learn from this part of history? It's a good question. If I were to make a movie that was based off of traditional values, I'm sure I would be criticized about it by excluding liberal political talking points, which I've heard that they're very prominent these days, especially on Netflix series. but I don't think politics should be in the form of entertainment. You're supposed to be going to the theater to get away, as an escape. And I gave this example also for musicians, which some musicians in the past that I've worked with didn't agree with that point of view. But that's how I view it. One of the bands, Def Leppard, very well-known band from the 80s, they never talk about politics at their shows. And I think that's a very smart decision because you would be alienating a lot of your audience. Your audience is going to escape from their daily problems, and they don't want to hear about what they hear everywhere else. Like, I log on to Twitter, right? So all you see are political posts, political content, swayed one way or the other depending on what you've liked. The algorithm goes in and it just keeps shoving all this stuff down your throat. Nothing else. A lot of political stuff. Just refresh after refresh. It's all you see. Political stuff. And it's sad that we don't have that form of escapism anymore. It's always shoved in our faces nowadays. Can we just go to the movies and watch something, let's say, for example, a movie about, like, the Bad News Bears? That type of concept. A team of coming-of-age boys trying to win a baseball tournament. Competition. That's a really good subject for escapism. Seeing success in others. Like, you want to be able to go and see something and leave the theater feeling changed. At least that's how I approached a lot of this stuff. You want to go and feel something. Not offense, not anger, but like something positive. Something that'll make you think when you leave the theater. Not just like, oh yeah, that was good. So what are we having to eat now? I'd rather go see a film where when you go and eat and sit down, then you go and you can further discuss what you watched. And have fun while doing it. But everything's so polarized now, it's very hard to find those types of gems of movies. Especially the ones that make you think. A lot of this nowadays, especially in the past 50, 60 years, there's been a lot of esoteric messaging being silently inserted into a lot of these major films from these major film studios. That'll also be another series of deep dives that I'll be going down. These Masonic Easter eggs that have been put into all these films. But ultimately, this was all about control. Edison wanted control over the entire market. He squashed creativity in doing so, even if it was unintentional. But ultimately, he wanted total control, and that ended up backfiring on him. So, hopefully, what we can learn from the Chicago film industry is, I guess, to give the people what they want. If they enjoy the concept of leaving their home, going into the city, going down the street to the Nickelodeon, the movie theater, just getting away for a few hours, having a little fun, I think that should be granted to the people that want to do that. It shouldn't be shoved down our throat through advertising. Go see this movie, go see this movie, go see this movie. I tend to like, I guess, the old-fashioned now, the physical posters like on the sides of buildings. Not the ads that come up on your phone. Like, that's a whole different form of advertising. The algorithm's all cooked into what you look at every day. But just objective advertising. A plane with a banner on it, go see this movie. I would think that's fine too. Be like, wow, someone really paid to have that plane fly. And what's the message up there? I want to read it. When I was younger, I'd always want to see what those planes would say. There was a lot of them that flew over Lake Michigan when I would go into the city from time to time. And that was a treat. Growing up, it was a treat to go into downtown Chicago. To walk the Mag Mile. To have lunch on the top of the John Hancock. To go to the Sears Tower and overlook the entire sprawl of the city, especially looking west and south. Hey Juan, good to see you here in the chat. But yeah, it's just I guess what I was saying is the type of advertisement that we get today, especially for films, I think it's just overdone. And I do like the physical poster type of advertising. The banners with the small range planes. Posters on the sides of public transportation, that was another cool one. Or on top of the taxi cabs, you'd have the little cardboard cutouts that were lit up. Or plastic inserts, whatever they are now. Christmas window displays, yeah. Yeah, Jason. And even, like, just word of mouth, too. Like, if you were to talk to a shop owner, let's say you go to get a pair of shoes. It's like, oh, well, what movies are you looking forward to, or what have you watched recently? And most of the time, it would be a very short list of films that people would recommend. Oh, you should go check this one out. Go check this one out. And it would purely be based off of the entertainment value. Like, a good film, in my opinion, is something that has entertainment for everyone just peppered in. Like, you'll at least find something that you'll gravitate to and relate to. You'll find a character that is like, hey, I see myself in that person. And no, they don't have to necessarily look like you. They can have long hair, and here I'm bald, and I can say, yeah, I relate with that character. The TV series Dragon Ball Z, I think, is a really good example of that. Where many different people can see themselves in a lot of the characters in that series. I haven't personally watched that series, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. But, yeah, we'll talk more about this next week. We'll be getting into the epilogue. It's about 8 pages. And then there's also a whole thing on Orson Welles. It said Oscar. I'm not sure which Oscar. But, yeah, we'll get into that. The postscript, Oscar and Orson. That'll be 2 weeks from now. And they're basically making stuff, like, on the ashes of this entire industry. So it's like, after these initial studios are long gone, long past their prime. So, we'll continue looking at this, and, we'll get a little more information on what exactly happened, but we have the overall story right now on what happened. And, yeah, hopefully we can learn from the past and make a better tomorrow, right? So with that being said, hope you all have a great rest of your weekend. I'll be here again tomorrow morning at 11 Central Time. Just gonna be a let's talk about it, chill Sunday chat. I guess you can call it like a live Q&A too. You guys can come in here and ask me questions about stuff. I'll engage that way with all of you, like I normally do. So, I hope you all have a great rest of your days and your weekend. And if I don't see you tomorrow, I hope to see you on Tuesday or Thursday. Until the next one, class dismissed.